I watched my husband smirk like a man who thought he owned the world, while our 8-year-old daughter sat across the table, clutching her pencil like it was her only shield. Then he said it. "I don't need you. I don't need Hazel. You're both useless." That was the moment my life shattered, and, ironically, the moment I realized I was about to win everything he thought he could take. Hi, my name is Miranda Reynolds, and I'm 34. For 10 years, I believed I had a happy marriage. Not perfect, far from it, but good. I was a forensic accountant before Hazel, my daughter, was born. I uncovered fraud schemes that executives thought were foolproof. I was damn good at my job. But when Hazel was diagnosed with a chronic respiratory condition at 2, I gave it all up to stay home, believing my husband, Derek Lawson, made enough money to support us both. I never thought I'd end up on the other side of betrayal, gaslighting, and lies. I didn't just lose my marriage, I nearly lost everything, including my dignity and my daughter. What Derek didn't know, though, is that I had skills he couldn't measure on a balance sheet. I wasn't just a mom, I was a forensic accountant. And what he was about to discover is that skills like mine never truly go to sleep, they just wait. 7 weeks later, the man who thought he had stolen my life was the one standing in court, frozen, watching his empire crumble around him. Let me tell you how it happened. I never saw it coming. Not in a million years. That Tuesday, everything felt normal. Hazel was at the kitchen table, pencils in hand, working on a math worksheet that made her brow furrow like it was the world's most pressing problem. I was chopping vegetables for dinner, humming along to some old country song on the radio. And then the front door opened. Derek. Early. Which was already unusual because Derek Lawson never came home early unless he wanted to make an announcement that would shake the foundations of your life. He walked in, loosened his tie, and for a moment I thought he was going to smile and tell me about a promotion, or maybe that he had taken the day off to spend time with us. But no. That smirk, the one that always made me doubt myself for not being funny enough, smart enough, attractive enough, it was there, but it didn't feel familiar anymore. "I filed for divorce," he said. Just like that. No preamble. No sympathy. No, we need to talk. Just cold, flat words. Divorce. The word hit me like a fist to the stomach, and my hands froze on the cutting board. Hazel looked up at him with wide eyes, the pencil stopping midair. "And I want everything," he continued, like reading from a checklist. "The house, the cars, the accounts, everything." Then his gaze shifted to Hazel. My baby girl. 8 years old. Sitting there, unaware of just how much her world was about to tilt. And he said it. He actually said it. "I don't need you. I don't need Hazel. She's stinky. Sick. A burden." Hazel's shoulders slumped. She tried to shrink into the chair. I felt her trembling, and instinctively, I wrapped my arms around her. She cried into my chest as the reality sank in. Derek, the man I had trusted, the man I had loved, was standing there as if our pain was a minor inconvenience to his schedule. And then, as if that wasn't enough, the doorbell rang. Of course it did. Because when your life is crumbling, there's always someone waiting to step in and make it worse. Dolores, Derek's mother, swept in. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She had a key, because of course she did. The woman had never liked me, and I think she took a particular pleasure in confirming Derek's cruelty. She came in like she owned the place, measuring windows, commenting on the furniture, and making sure her voice carried over Hazel's quiet sobs. "I always knew he'd do the right thing eventually," she said, beaming at Derek. "You've finally gotten rid of the gold digger." And just like that, I was reminded that not only was my husband trying to erase me, but his family was cheering him on. My own 10-year investment of love, patience, and sacrifice, trivial in their eyes. Derek gave me 48 hours to pack and leave. The house where Hazel took her first steps, where I had nursed her through fevers, where I had decorated her bedroom with pastel stars and moon decals, gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by Hazel's bed, listening to her tiny wheeze that never really left her lungs, feeling the hollow ache of betrayal in my chest. And somewhere in that haze of grief and panic, a small flicker of something else emerged: curiosity. Suspicion. I was a forensic accountant by trade. Numbers were my language. Money didn't lie. And when I found that first bank statement tucked behind Derek's nightstand, with balances that made no sense, I felt a spark of the old me, the woman who saw patterns, who discovered fraud, who didn't accept surface-level explanations. I didn't know it yet, but that crumpled piece of paper was the first thread in the unraveling of Derek Lawson. He thought he could take everything, but he had forgotten one thing: he had underestimated me. And sometimes, the moment you feel weakest is exactly the moment your fight begins. The next morning, I didn't wake up thinking I could fight Derek. I woke up thinking I needed to survive. Hazel was still asleep, curled up in the tiny rental apartment I'd found last minute, the same one that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and cardboard boxes. Derek's mother had called twice before 9 a.m., asking if she could stop by to pick up some things. I didn't answer. I couldn't. But I had the bank statement. That piece of paper, tucked in my purse, gave me a pulse of something I hadn't felt in a week: control. I spread it out on the little kitchen table, squinting at the numbers. My forensic accountant brain kicked in immediately. Something was off. Way off. Derek's reported income didn't match up with these transfers, these deposits, these hidden accounts. The math didn't lie. But people did. And that's when the realization hit me like a train. Derek hadn't just decided to leave me. He had been planning this for years. 2 years, if the pattern of transactions was correct. 2 years of late nights he said were work, 2 years of vacations he claimed were business trips, 2 years of building a secret life while I stayed home taking care of our daughter. I felt my stomach churn. Rage. Betrayal. Fear. But fear was fading. I needed help. My old friend and former college roommate, Joanna Miles, was still practicing forensic accounting. She answered my call at 11 p.m., half asleep, a cup of cold coffee in hand. I spilled everything: how Derek had stripped Hazel of her health insurance, how he filed for divorce out of nowhere, and how something in the numbers screamed fraud. Joanna didn't gasp or cry. She laughed. Not cruelly, but that kind of full-bodied, relieved laugh of someone who finally gets to solve a puzzle. "I've been waiting for a case like this," she said. A cheating husband, hidden accounts, tax manipulation. Oh, Miranda. This is going to be fun. We met the next day in my cramped living room, which had become a war room. Boxes were stacked along the walls, takeout containers littered the floor, and Hazel's drawings were taped haphazardly to the windows. Joanna brought her laptop, a legal pad, and a calculator that looked like it had survived the 90s. We spread everything out: bank statements, old tax returns, credit card receipts, even old invoices I'd saved just in case. And the more we dug, the uglier it got. Derek had opened multiple accounts under different names, siphoned money from business income, claimed personal expenses as corporate deductions. There were offshore accounts, a shadow company registered in Delaware, transactions that screamed embezzlement. The total discrepancy? Over $600,000. Money that should have been ours, mine, Hazel's, gone. I felt a strange combination of panic and empowerment. Panic, because this man I had trusted, loved, even protected, had betrayed us on every possible level. Empowerment, because now I knew the truth, and the truth is a weapon if you know how to use it. I sat back, hands trembling, looking at Joanna. "So," I said quietly, "we have him." She nodded. "We have everything. And you know what this means, right? You can fight. You can win. And not just for the divorce. This is criminal. Tax fraud, embezzlement, misrepresentation to business partners. He's not untouchable." Hazel wandered into the room, clutching Biscuit, the stuffed rabbit we'd brought from home. She didn't understand the magnitude yet. She didn't know the man who called her stinky and sick was hiding thousands of dollars in secret accounts. But she knew I wasn't crying anymore. My voice was steady. My hands weren't shaking. I had a plan. For the first time since Derek had filed those papers, I felt awake. Clear. Calculating. Ruthless, if necessary. This was no longer just about survival. It was about justice. About proving that the man who tried to erase me, my daughter, and my life could not hide behind money, lawyers, or arrogance. He had made one critical mistake, underestimating me. And in that moment, as the glow of my laptop illuminated the stacks of documents on the table, I realized something else. I was no longer the woman who gave up her career for her family. I was Miranda Lawson. Forensic accountant. Mother. Woman who sees every number, every lie, every secret. And Derek had just stepped into the biggest mistake of his life. The first night I laid out Derek's financial records on the dining table, Hazel was asleep in the other room, her breathing steady but shallow enough to remind me how fragile she could be. I sipped lukewarm coffee and felt my fingers itch with a familiar sort of excitement, like an old muscle waking up after years of disuse. Forensic accounting wasn't just my career, it was my secret weapon. And Derek had just handed me the ammunition. I called Joanna again, and we worked late into the night, tracing wire transfers, cross-referencing account numbers, and uncovering patterns Derek thought only he could see. Every time we discovered a hidden account or a misreported business expense, a small thrill went through me. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone who knew the law as well as I knew numbers. Camille Ortega, a family attorney with a reputation for taking on the untouchable, was the person Joanna recommended. Camille's office was above a tiny bakery downtown, the smell of cinnamon and fresh bread drifting into the hallway. She greeted me with a firm handshake and an appraisal that made me feel seen, not pitted. "You've got a mess," Camille said with a small smile, looking over the documents Joanna had scanned and sent ahead. "And it's beautiful. If we play this right, Derek won't know what hit him." I felt a flicker of hope. Camille explained our strategy: keep Derek comfortable with the illusion that he was winning, but quietly gather evidence of fraud, hidden accounts, and financial misrepresentation. Every slip-up would be recorded. Every false statement would be catalogued. And when the right moment came, it would all come crashing down. Then there was Ruth. Quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who could disappear in a room and still notice everything. Derek's secretary had been with him almost as long as his company had existed, and she had seen it all: shady invoices, falsified transfers, offshore accounts. At first, she was hesitant to speak up. The risk was huge. Losing her job at 62 wasn't a small thing. But when she saw the extent of Derek's lies, she realized that staying silent was worse. Ruth became our inside source, providing scanned documents, emails, and even some handwritten notes Derek had left lying around. Together, the three of us, Joanna, Camille, and Ruth, became a quiet storm. We met late at night in my tiny apartment, spreading statements across the floor like detectives at a crime scene. Numbers, emails, bank statements, business ledgers, credit card bills, all mapped out, color-coded, cross-referenced. Derek had been sloppy, arrogantly so. Every hidden account, every unexplained transfer, every attempt to cheat the system was there in black and white. And then came the personal side. Tiffany, Derek's girlfriend of 2 years, was a liability we couldn't ignore. Social media posts, photos, credit card receipts, all evidence of the affair, and also proof that Derek was misusing business funds for personal indulgences. Camille assured me this could strengthen my case, not just for the divorce, but for child custody, financial restitution, and even criminal exposure. At some point, Hazel would wander in, drawn by the smell of takeout or the sound of our quiet laughter when we discovered another discrepancy. She would peek at the table, eyes wide. I explained to her, in age-appropriate terms, that Mommy was working to make sure we had what we needed. She would smile, clutch biscuit, and toddle back to her room. I realized then that part of the fight wasn't just legal. It was emotional, protecting her from the fear I had felt in the first week after Derek's betrayal. By the end of the second week, we had a complete map of Derek's financial deception, hidden accounts totaling over $600,000, offshore transactions, shell companies, misreported income, and personal expenses masquerading as business deductions. But it wasn't enough to go to court yet. Camille stressed patience. We needed to strike with precision, timing it to maximize leverage while minimizing risk. For the first time since Derek's betrayal, I felt like I was no longer running from the storm. I was building it. And the truth, finally organized, was going to hit Derek harder than anything he ever imagined. Once we had Derek's financial skeletons mapped out, Camille emphasized one word: patience. "Strike too early, and he'll cover it up," she said. I nodded, but inside, I was buzzing. Every day, Derek strutted around thinking he had won, blind to the storm we were assembling. I let him think that. I cried at the right moments, stumbled through legal paperwork, and responded meekly to his gloating. He practically purred at my supposed defeat. Perfect. The first step of the counterattack was subtle: paperwork requests, depositions, and small, seemingly innocuous interrogatories. Camille instructed me to ask questions that sounded naive but were strategic traps. "Mommy doesn't know numbers like this," I would mumble. Derek leaned back, smirk on his face, completely confident. Every answer he gave, every claim he made, was recorded. Every casual exaggeration or slip-up became another thread in the web we were weaving. Meanwhile, Joanna and I were still in full forensic mode, digging through every account Derek controlled. Hidden transfers, misclassified business expenses, offshore accounts. I swear, the man could have written a textbook on how to lie with numbers. But we had him. Ruth's intel was invaluable. She quietly delivered internal memos, draft contracts, emails he thought had been deleted. Every piece added to the dossier, creating a map of his deceit and greed. The personal side couldn't be ignored. Tiffany, his girlfriend, was still oblivious. Social media posts, receipts, photos, all a record of his lies. Camille suggested we let him continue his careless indulgences. "He's a man addicted to ego," she said. "The bigger the display, the bigger the fall." So while Derek spent thousands on Tiffany, thinking I was struggling in a tiny apartment, our files grew thicker. Every luxury he bought illegally, every dollar deducted as a business expense that wasn't, was a nail in his coffin. Then came the cleverest part: controlling perception. Camille insisted I maintain the image of the overwhelmed, fragile ex-wife. I cried on the phone to Derek when he called to gloat. I expressed confusion over legal forms he assumed I didn't understand. I let him underestimate me entirely. He bragged about his generous settlement, called me weak, and even dropped hints that Tiffany and he were planning a vacation as soon as the case closed. All of it went into the record. At the same time, Camille filed motions that forced Derek to produce more documents. Every day, we pushed him further into revealing what he thought was hidden. He had already committed the perfect crime, or so he believed, but arrogance is a dangerous thing. The more he flaunted his lifestyle, the more evidence we gathered. By the end of the third week, we had the full financial picture: $600,000 in hidden accounts, 3 offshore shell companies, misreported income for years, and a pattern of fraudulent deductions. Every dollar traced, every transaction cross-referenced, ready for the courtroom. But the real weapon wasn't just the money. It was his pride. Camille suggested a silent tactical strike, notifying Derek's business partners, anonymously, of irregularities in his accounts. If they started asking questions, it would rattle him before the court hearing even began. I felt a thrill at the thought: Derek, confident and cocky, suddenly facing scrutiny he hadn't anticipated. And then came the icing on the cake: Ruth's final contribution. She provided 3 thick folders of documents Derek thought were gone forever: emails, internal ledgers, handwritten notes, and contracts proving not only marital fraud but potential tax violations. "This is the nuclear option," she whispered. But I had already learned that sometimes, the only way to win is to go all in. By week 4, the counterattack wasn't subtle anymore. Derek was still walking around, thinking he owned everything, my house, my daughter's well-being, my sense of safety, but we were ready. Every piece of evidence, every carefully orchestrated document, and every strategic legal motion had created a trap he would never see coming. Camille assured me, the moment we presented this in court, it would be over. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled without guilt. This wasn't just about winning a divorce anymore. It was about justice, for Hazel, for me, and for every person Derek had deceived along the way. The storm was ready. All that remained was for him to step into it. The morning of the hearing, I barely slept. Hazel was tucked into my small apartment bed, clutching Biscuit the cat, and I kissed her forehead before leaving. Camille reminded me that appearances matter. "You're not just a mother, you're a force," she said. I wore a simple navy blazer, crisp white blouse, hair pulled back, not flashy, but polished. The goal, someone looking at me in that courtroom should immediately see competence and integrity. Derek arrived with his entourage of lawyers and Tiffany trailing like an accessory, all smiles and arrogance. His mother, Eleanor, sat front row, perfectly coiffed, clutching a notebook as if she were about to grade the proceedings. He winked at me across the courtroom like this was some kind of game. I gave a small smile, enough to seem fragile, nothing more. Camille whispered, "Let him think he's won. He'll make mistakes." Bradley Whitmore, the high-priced lawyer who always seemed untouchable, carried himself like a lion. But Camille had a plan. He would underestimate us. That was his fatal flaw. She opened the session with calm efficiency, reviewing what the court already knew, our marriage, the disputed assets, the child's welfare. Then she asked Derek questions that seemed innocuous, almost routine, but each answer he gave, each confident nod, became part of the net. Exhibit A, my grandmother's inheritance wired to me for the house down payment. Derek stuttered when questioned about why the house was titled solely in his name. Whitmore whispered something to him, but Camille didn't falter. She calmly outlined the transfer, matched it to closing documents, and highlighted the memo line in my handwriting. The courtroom went quiet. Derek's confidence flickered. Next came the hidden accounts. Camille introduced a detailed spreadsheet tracing every transaction. Offshore accounts, undisclosed investments, money siphoned from his own business partners, each entry tied to a date and document. Whitmore objected, but Camille had anticipated everything. "Judge, these records were obtained legally through discovery and corroborated by multiple sources, including former employees," she said. Overruled. Then the shell companies, fraud evidence, and the extravagant spending on Tiffany. Camille laid out credit card statements, apartment leases, even the $4,000 necklace he claimed as a business expense. Tiffany shifted uncomfortably, realizing the Maldives trip was never happening. Eleanor gasped audibly. Derek's smirk was gone. Fear replaced it. The highlight was the unexpected courtroom presence of his business partners. They had received our anonymous evidence packets days before. When Camille referenced them, the men in the back row nodded solemnly. Derek's face turned pale. One of them, Gregory, shook his head slowly, disappointment radiating from every line of his face. This was more than embarrassment, it was the collapse of his empire of trust. Finally, Camille focused on Hazel. She emphasized the importance of a stable, loving environment for a child with medical needs. Derek tried to claim he was best suited, but Camille presented evidence of him removing Hazel from insurance and leaving me to shoulder prescriptions and treatment costs. The judge's gaze was steady, piercing. By the end of the session, the courtroom tension was palpable. Derek couldn't speak without revealing another inconsistency. Whitmore's usual air of invincibility had evaporated. Camille's calm confidence had turned the trial into a spectacle of his arrogance unraveling. When Judge Fitzgerald finally ruled, the room held its collective breath. Full custody of Hazel to me. The house, purchased with my inheritance, officially transferred to my name. 70% of all marital assets awarded due to fraud and hidden accounts. Immediate restoration of Hazel's health insurance. Derek Carrington, once cocky and untouchable, had lost everything. The courtroom erupted quietly with murmurs. Tiffany fled, Eleanor froze, and Derek stared in disbelief. Whitmore looked like someone had hit him with a sledgehammer. And me? I just held Hazel's hand, whispering that it was over, finally over. Justice had arrived, and it was deliciously thorough. The moment the courtroom ruling came down, the cracks in Derek Carrington's life widened faster than I ever could have imagined. He had thought his wealth, charm, and high-priced lawyer made him untouchable. He had been wrong, spectacularly so. Within hours, the consequences of his arrogance started cascading like dominoes. First, the business partners. The three men who had been quietly observing the trial suddenly became active players. Gregory, the one I'd known at company events, didn't even try to hide his fury. They demanded an immediate audit of every financial transaction Derek had touched in the past 5 years. The shell company, the offshore accounts, the phantom expenses, everything was being scrutinized. Within a week, several lawsuits were filed against him for embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty. The man who had built his empire on deception was watching it collapse under legal scrutiny. Then came the federal authorities. Camille had thoughtfully sent copies of the evidence anonymously to the IRS. Tax fraud, fraudulent business deductions, and undisclosed income, Derek's life was about to get much more complicated. His assets were frozen, his corporate credit cards cancelled, and his passport flagged. Plans for a luxurious celebration in the Maldives with Tiffany evaporated instantly. He called her, panicked and sweating through the call, trying to salvage their relationship, but Tiffany had already started to disappear. The expensive car, the apartment, the designer gifts, gone or repossessed. She wasn't the problem anymore, Derek's life was. Social media, too, turned against him. Eleanor had previously posted about how I was a gold digger, unworthy of Derek, but now, with public records showing his hidden accounts, tax issues, and betrayal of business partners, her posts became cringeworthy. Friends and acquaintances who had whispered about me behind my back were now quietly congratulating me instead. The narrative Derek had so carefully constructed over months, painting me as unstable, unfit, and greedy, crumbled. Derek's personal life imploded in ways that money could not fix. Tiffany vanished within hours after the court ruling. Her Instagram posts disappeared. The apartment he rented in her name was reclaimed. The car, the jewelry, even the luxurious Maldives vacation plan, all irrelevant now. He had built a life around control and appearances, but when the truth came out, nothing remained. Professionally, his reputation was shattered. Business partners refused to trust him, investors pulled out, and employees began questioning his decisions. Every phone call, every email that Camille had meticulously traced, was a potential liability. Derek Carrington, the man who once commanded respect, was now scrambling to justify himself, while every legal misstep he had ever made became ammunition in multiple suits. Even Eleanor, once confident in her son's superiority, froze. She no longer posted on social media, no longer bragged about Derek's wisdom, no longer tried to humiliate me. Her pride crumbled as she realized the man she had defended and adored for years was now completely powerless. Meanwhile, Hazel thrived. Her treatments were back on track, the medical bills covered, and she could live in the home I had fought for with love and determination. Watching her breathe easier, smiling and playing with Biscuit, I realized that Derek's collapse wasn't just personal justice, it was protection for my daughter. Every court victory, every exposed lie, every hidden account revealed was a brick in the wall of Hazel's future. Derek's final humiliation came quietly. I ran into him at the grocery store about a month later. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by ill-fitting khakis and a wrinkled shirt. His confident smirk was replaced by silence, his eyes darting nervously. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I just walked past with Hazel in hand, Biscuit perched in her backpack for fun. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. It was poetic, really. The man who had tried to take everything from me, the man who had insulted my child and underestimated me for 10 years, now had nothing. Not money, not love, not power. Meanwhile, Hazel and I had everything that mattered, a safe home, security, and the knowledge that we could survive anything. Derek's collapse wasn't just justice, it was the universe's way of balancing a life that had been cruelly out of whack for far too long. After Derek Carrington's empire started crumbling, life for Hazel and me slowly began to take on a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. For so long, I'd been defined as someone's wife, someone's mother, someone invisible in a marriage that wasn't what it seemed. Now, I was just me. And it felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The first step was reclaiming our home. Walking back through the front door after the court ruling felt surreal. This was my house, the one I had invested my grandmother's inheritance into, the one Derek had tried to steal through deceit. Hazel's small hands gripped mine as we stepped inside. She ran to her old bedroom, laughing as she imagined the new colors she wanted for the walls. Purple with silver stars, she decided, something bright, magical, and entirely her own. It struck me how such small choices could feel revolutionary after years of being sidelined. We adopted Biscuit, a scruffy little cat from the shelter, because Hazel had always wanted a pet. He quickly became our shadow, curling at the foot of her bed at night. Watching Hazel play and breathe easier, without the constant cough that had plagued her for years, was a reminder that this fight had never been about revenge alone. It had been about her survival, her safety, and reclaiming her childhood from the chaos Derek had tried to create. Financially, I was starting over, but not from zero. I had my forensic accounting certifications up to date, a quiet savings account that Derek never knew about, and the support of my best friend Patricia, who had been my partner in financial crime fighting throughout the divorce. She introduced me to firms looking for experienced forensic accountants, and within a month, I had 3 job offers. I chose the one with the best health coverage and a flexible schedule, a priority now that I was raising Hazel alone. Returning to work after 6 years felt strange at first. My old skills had been dormant, but not lost. I quickly remembered the thrill of uncovering discrepancies, following the paper trail, and catching someone in a lie. It wasn't just about income, it was about justice, about turning expertise into empowerment. Every morning I left for work, Hazel waved goodbye with a confidence I hadn't seen in years. I wasn't just her mother, I was an example of resilience, someone who could fight and win, someone who refused to be invisible. Socially, I also had to rebuild. Many friends had believed Derek's lies during the divorce proceedings. Some distanced themselves, embarrassed by their earlier assumptions. But over time, people saw the truth. The evidence of his fraud, embezzlement, and personal deceit was public record. Slowly, friendships rekindled, apologies were made, and a community that had once supported Derek began supporting us instead. It was humbling and healing to realize I wasn't alone. Even Hazel adapted with surprising resilience. I explained her father's absence in age-appropriate terms. He made poor choices and had to face the consequences. She didn't fully understand taxes, court filings, or hidden bank accounts, but she did understand safety, love, and security. She knew her mother was fighting for her, and that knowledge allowed her to flourish in ways I had feared might never come. I also took time to heal emotionally. For years, fear and betrayal had dictated my life. Now, I learned to embrace joy again. Cooking dinner without fear, planning weekends that weren't dictated by Derek's schedule, even sitting quietly with a cup of coffee as Hazel colored beside me, it all became acts of reclamation. These moments were small, but after years of tension, they were revolutionary. Finally, there was a quiet satisfaction in seeing Derek's decline. Not in a cruel way, rather, it was the closure that justice provides. The IRS, business partners, and courts had all held him accountable. He was diminished, powerless, and alone. Meanwhile, Hazel and I had a home, security, and a future built on honesty, resilience, and love. We were rebuilding. Piece by piece, day by day, life was returning, not perfect, but ours. And in the process, I discovered something I had almost forgotten: strength isn't measured in dollars or appearances. It's measured in persistence, integrity, and the courage to fight for the people you love. Hazel and I had survived the storm. And now, we were free. The day of Derek's final reckoning felt like something out of a movie, except this time, I wasn't a bystander, I was the one writing the script. 7 weeks of preparation, sleepless nights, and meticulous evidence gathering had led to this moment. I still remember the courthouse, smaller than I imagined, with its polished wooden panels and faint scent of old paper, and that low hum of tension only courtrooms can carry. Derek arrived with his usual swagger, like he owned the place. His tailored suit, expensive watch, and confident smirk were all armor. Beside him, Bradley Whitmore looked just as untouchable as ever, the king of divorces who had never lost a case. In the gallery, his mother, Dolores, took her seat, her designer heels clicking like a drumbeat of judgment. Tiffany was there too, but she didn't dare meet my eyes. And, tucked inconspicuously in the back row, sat Derek's business partners, the same men who had received my anonymous evidence packages 2 days earlier. Their expressions were unreadable, and that uncertainty made my stomach flip with anticipation. When Judge Eleonora Fitzgerald entered, the room hushed. She was severe, sharp-eyed, and exuded an aura that made liars wilt. Whitmore started first, painting Derek as a wronged husband, a businessman burdened by a wife who had mismanaged everything. His words dripped with practiced pity and thinly veiled condescension. Derek nodded along, entirely confident in his inevitable victory. Then Camille began. She was calm, precise, and merciless. She started with the basics: dates, finances, home ownership. She let Derek confirm facts that appeared innocuous but would later be explosives. And then came the evidence. Exhibit A, the bank statements showing the $175,000 wire transfer from my personal inheritance to the house's closing company. Exhibit B, my grandmother's estate documents proving the source of those funds. Derek's smile faltered. Whitmore whispered frantically, but the judge's eyes never left the exhibits. Camille introduced Exhibits C through J, the hidden investment accounts totaling over $600,000, offshore accounts, and corporate shell companies Derek had been using to siphon money. She methodically connected the dots to show fraud, embezzlement, and misrepresentation in his divorce filings. Derek went pale. He looked as if someone had stolen the floor from beneath him. Whitmore's hands trembled over his leather briefcase. Never in his career had he faced such a meticulously documented avalanche of evidence. Then came the coup de grace, Tiffany. Camille presented receipts showing Derek's extravagant gifts and apartments for her, all falsely claimed as business expenses. She noted this could be considered tax fraud. Tiffany's face drained of color. Her smug confidence vanished as she realized this was no longer about Derek's divorce. It was about exposing criminal behavior to the IRS and federal authorities. She quietly slipped out of the courtroom, disappearing like a ghost from a life she had been living off Derek's lies. Dolores froze. Her notebook, once meant to chronicle my humiliation, lay forgotten in her lap. She no longer had the moral high ground, the truth had flipped the narrative entirely. Derek tried to speak, claiming lies, but Judge Fitzgerald cut him off coldly. I've seen people lie in this courtroom. But this level of fraud? That is audacious, she said, staring at him like a storm had arrived at his doorstep. The ruling was devastating for Derek: full custody of Hazel to me, complete ownership of the house, 70% of marital assets awarded due to fraud and hidden accounts, full child support based on his real income, and immediate restoration of Hazel's health insurance. His empire began to crumble instantly. The IRS, federal investigators, and his business partners all moved swiftly to hold him accountable. In the weeks that followed, Derek lost everything. Assets frozen, passports flagged, and his reputation destroyed. Meanwhile, Hazel and I thrived. She flourished in her newly painted room, with biscuit at her feet, her cough eased by proper care. I returned to work as a forensic accountant, rebuilding my career while teaching Hazel the lessons of resilience and integrity. Justice had arrived, but it wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoring life, reclaiming dignity, and showing Hazel that truth, persistence, and courage could overcome even the most manipulative forces. Derek had tried to take everything from us, but in the end, he had taken the wrong path. And we had taken back our world, piece by piece, stronger than ever. Miranda's meticulous planning, forensic skills, and unwavering courage turned what seemed like total loss into a complete victory. From uncovering hidden accounts to exposing fraud and reclaiming her home and custody of Hazel, she proved that intelligence, perseverance, and moral conviction can dismantle even the most carefully constructed empire of lies. Justice wasn't just served, it was perfected.